thank you very much. This has been a fun group. I was fighting the government, many of you know, a few years ago, and a friend of mine, Reed Smith, said, hey, there's this meeting up in Salt Lake City, we got to go. All right, Layton actually, but Salt Lake City. And okay, so 2 years ago we went out and joined you for your first meeting in Layton, Utah. And next year we're going to grow. It's going to be a bigger conference next year. But we learned a lot, met a lot of great people, went back and spoke last year in Omaha, Nebraska. And I really like this group a lot because it's not the highest mucky mucks and the biggest organizations telling the story. And that's a necessary thing. We need to hear from our leaders, and we need these big organizations. It's the families that are on the front line. It's the Haigs. It's the Duartes doing their thing. We hear a lot of different voices, and you understand how these different stories are so much the same. And so I like this conference a lot. It's really important to me that we're all here in Modesto together. I do have a lot of my family with me. My wife Alexandra and youngest daughter Elizabeth, my mom Anita, my dad Jim, who Trent has interviewed. My dad's been on the front line of a number of things for many decades. It's a family heritage. And my daughter Victoria is our oldest down there. So thank you for coming out, and thank you for having me. I've really often contextualized the battles we have with, I'm going to let the environmentalist have the environmentalism word. They can have that. We're ecologists, and ecology is part of what we do. And ecology is a science, and it's how we sustain the resources in the earth we live in and provide for ourselves. And I'm going to use ecology as a replacement for environmentalism, because environmentalism has become a destructive anti-human activism mode that is the dumbest thing in the world. I mean, environmentalism used to be about protecting the environment we live in so it can nourish us, and it was a pro-human movement to not poison our environment. It's now become an anti-human movement to limit our use of the environment to feed ourselves. And so I want to go a little bit into the history of Modesto because it's a beautiful backdrop for this discussion. And what's going on here in Modesto politically, what our history is, really frames this battle between a visionary use of our resources and how it's improved humans' lives and the idiocies of the environmental movement. And we need a bigger room. We need a bigger room than this. And I really think a broad group of Americans need to take interest immediately in what's going on with food supply, and even housing through resource activism and obstructionism. So here's Modesto, Food City USA. That's my own little moniker. I think they should adopt it, but they don't always listen. The next slide is going to be Don Pedro Reservoir. Don Pedro Reservoir was constructed, well, originally the original diversion off the Tuolumne River that supplies the Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts was formed, the group for that was formed in 1874. So there's Don Pedro Reservoir, 2.2 million acre-foot capacity. It supplies the Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts. It also provides flood control for this entire river valley. Huge watershed. That's the watershed out of Yosemite. Above the Don Pedro Reservoir is the controversial Hetch Hetchy Reservoir that supplies San Francisco. This Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts were the first special purpose districts formed in California back in 1887, so very visionary. Here's the district map here, and because Modesto and Turlock, Stanislaus County, was early to irrigated agriculture and early to having this resource and applying it, we have some of the biggest ag industry in the world here. I call it Food City in the Food City USA. We've got the biggest cheese plant now down in Merced County, just south of us. We've got the biggest wineries in the world with Gallo Winery. We've got the biggest canneries in the world. We'll walk through that. Here's cheese. That's Hilmar cheese down there. That was just a bunch of Jersey cow and those are Holsteins, but Jersey cow farmers that decided they wanted to build their own cheese plant. They started the same year Duarte Nursery did, 1989. And so this isn't a huge legacy company. This is a modern, new company that's still growing. Now, that used to be the biggest cheese plant in the world. The biggest cheese plant in the world now is in Delhart, Texas, because the dairymen couldn't expand and grow in California anymore. They moved a big part of their facility over to Texas. But we have Fiscalini cheese. You had some of you Had some of that last night. We've got cooperative dairies, Oakdale cheese, Foster Farms. Who's heard of Foster Farms? Chickens, turkeys, butter, ice cream, eggs. Modesto, right here. The family property is right next to one of our properties here in Modesto, where Max and Edith Foster started Foster Farms back in the 1930s. Multi-billion-dollar family-owned company. Tomatoes, canneries. We have Tri-Valley Growers was here. My grandfather on my dad's side was a peach grower. Huge volume of tomatoes processed through here, as well as peaches and other cannery items. We've got Del Monte, Signature Foods, Seneca. They just shut down because they can't get enough labor here in California. Stanislaus Food Products, if you go to a high-end Italian restaurant, they're probably making the ultra-premium spaghetti sauces that you're getting at some of the nicer Italian restaurants and chains around America. ConAgra Foods up in Oakdale, Hungry Man Dinners, Hunt's Tomato Products. This is all facilities based right here in Modesto. We're not the biggest ag county in California, but we were the first county to really provide irrigated agriculture from this kind of visionary infrastructure. Here's Duarte Nursery. Because the Stanislaus County area is a great place to grow trees and vines and many different crops, it also had early irrigated agriculture. So we've got all the old historic nurseries as well as Duarte Nursery, which is kind of new on the, founded in 1989 too, but this is where Duarte Nursery, Birchall Nursery, Dave Wilson Nursery, Zager Genetics, Michael France is a director on TID's board. He'll be speaking here at this event this week, talking about some of the challenges our irrigation districts are facing right now. The irrigation districts that supply these industries and that feed the world. Green Tree, Oriston, but several little ones. That's E&J Gallo. Now everyone knows that's a Modesto company, right? That's one of their wineries. That's their Livingston facility, about in the county south of here. They produce about 30 to 40% of the wine of California right now. They're buying up labels. They're expanding. They have another facility equal to this size down in Fresno County, and they have their main bottling plant headquarters and administration offices right here in Modesto. This is very important because a lot of these big food companies are reversing the brain drain most rural communities have. A lot of our kids graduate, they go off to Cal Poly, they go to Davis, they go over to Berkeley or UCLA, and they don't come home. It's these major food processors and companies that bring the Ivy League graduates, the college graduates from around the country, back to Modesto to fill their high-level needs for highly educated people. So a lot of the most educated people in Modesto may or may not work for Gallo today, but they came here because Gallo brought them in, or one of the major food companies brought them to Modesto. So these companies are very important to us for these reasons also. So E&J Gallo, the wine group, Bronco, that's Two Buck Chuck, used to be anyways, and Delicato, Gnarly Head, if you've ever heard of their numbered Cabernet 337. All those companies are either in Stanislaus County or our adjacent counties, San Joaquin and Merced. Almonds, I mean, that's one of California's biggest commodities. Blue Diamond is right here in Modesto, just north of your hotel, in the big Salida plant. That's what we've got there. There's a little family-owned almond plant doing hulling and shelling and feeding them out in an elevator. There's an almond orchard. This industry feeds Duarte Nursery a lot. We sell probably about 4 million almond trees a year. That's all because this is where the processors are. This is where the growers are. A lot of controversy about different farm plantings. I know up in the Napa and the North Coast in the last couple of years, there's been a huge environmental movement against chainsaw Cabernet. This is a North Coast vineyard owned by one of the major wineries. Well, when the fires came through the North Coast this last summer, Victoria, my daughter, was over there in Sonoma. She came home for a week and a half when they canceled Santa Rosa Junior College so that she could avoid the fire impacts. The vineyards were huge, valuable fire breaks. We're going to be talking, I know there'll be a speaker this week about forestry and forest health and managing fires, and that's going to be a really interesting talk because there are just enormous idiocies there to be revealed. So here's all the crops. This is out of the California Agricultural Report that shows all the crops that California produces the most of. And if it's in bold, California produces 99% of it for the United States. This is how important California agriculture is to your dinner plate and many dinner plates. And it's all globally focused food production, and that's important to know. So this is out of the USDA report on agriculture. This is a current USDA report on agriculture, and this looks at Americans and says, let's break the American population into 5 quintiles: the top 20% through the bottom 20% income-wise, and they're spending as a percent of income on food, and their overall spending on food. So here we have, at the very bottom 20% of Americans, we have, and I'm going to come back to this concept a lot during my presentation, both today and tomorrow. We have a family that's barely making ends meet. That doesn't look like a big food budget. And that's about a $4,000 annual food budget. That's 30% of their income. That's over 30% of their income is going to support a $4,000 a year food budget. Here we are, you know, this isn't the 1%ers. These are $150,000 on up in income. And here we are spending, heck, what is it, $12,000, $13,000 a year on food? It's only making up 7 or 8% of our income. These are the folks we need to be talking to, right here. Those lower income groups that are spending a very large amount of their money on food. This was out of the International Report of Horticultural Sciences. This was 2008. So this is not today. This is 10 years ago. But these are the numbers we had in a really nice graphic layout, so I borrowed it. There's imports and exports, or production of fruit and vegetables. There's a USA, 3% of the population producing more than 3% of the fruits and vegetables. There's China, producing huge amount. That's a lot of bok choy. That is not a global food system. That is a bunch of village farmers selling bok choy and other vegetables in the village markets. That's going to stay in China. Every bit of this food here, if you look at those factories and those wineries and those food plants I just showed you, that's all global. It will go to the highest bidder. That food is not going to stay anywhere it's not being bid for. Here's the world exports and imports of fruit and vegetables. And now here you can see United States, that's the globalization. Look, remember how big the dots were with what we produce? Look at what we're importing and exporting. China, a little bit of exports, not much imports yet. So here we are. Aside from global markets for our food resources are land and water, right? Those are primary, of course, our technology and our hard work and our food production system. Another major producer, competitor for food resources is landscape horticulture, vanity landscapes. There it is. So if you look at what's happening with landscapes in developed economies, we put an enormous amount of dollars and resources into just our golf courses, our parks, our homes, and I like all these things. I want to live in a community with big golf courses. I don't golf, but you know, I want other people to have golf courses. Parks, homes. You know, I like to go to a shopping center and see landscaping and see that in our community. That is unique to very rich economies. As these economies get wealthier, they're going to do what we do. They are going to be moving food resources towards these priorities as well as food production. So here's GDP purchasing power parity for China. Now, when I just showed you that Chinese map that didn't show a lot of exports and imports in China, that was their GDP purchasing power parity in 2008. We're talking about $7,000, maybe $7,500. Here's their purchasing power parity in 2017. I found a website. It's Index Muni. I don't know. I started searching for facts and statistics. You remember Ross Perot, flip charts? Well, I am going to be Ross Perot on crack when it comes to these kinds of charts. There's just so much information here that guides to where this is heading if we don't take an abundant strategy towards food. So here's what China's doing. Now, the bottom 20 percentile of Americans, their purchasing power parity per capita is $13,000. The low-income America is already significantly below China. China and our bottom 20% was equal in 2011, China's purchasing power parity on average was equal to the bottom 20% of Americans. Today, it's not double, but approaching it. Within 5 years, it'll be double. It'll probably be equal to the bottom 40% of Americans. China is going to eat our lunch. And if you're not a high-income America, China is very specifically going to eat your lunch. You know, we've all heard about suburban food deserts or urban food deserts where we can't get into these cities and deliver the kinds of supermarkets and the kind of choice and the kind of variety and diversity that we know the nutritional need is there for. We're moving towards suburban food deserts if we don't create abundance of the things people want to eat. We will be moving into a lack of diet diversity for middle-income Americans. There's per capita, almost $17,000 purchase power parity. China's already doing it. Now here's that 2008 bubble again, right here on the orange donut. Here's what's happened in the last 10 years with almonds exporting to China. Now that's probably a 5% per year, 10 or 12% per year growth rate. Remember a number when you want to understand charts like this. This is a little bit of schooling here, I guess, but remember the number 72. 72, the year Nixon got reelected. If you divide 10 into 72, 10% growth, you will double compounding growth in 7.2 years. If you divide 7.2 into 72, you will double on compounding growth every 10 years. So as we start hearing 7% growth on Chinese economy, think 10 years to doubling. It's that easy. So these compounding growth rates in the economy in other countries are going to dwarf us. If America can grow at 3 to 4%, we can fix a lot of this. If America can't grow at 3 to 4% and only grows at 1 or 2% while China grows at 7%, they're not only going to have geopolitical pressures on us and influence around the world that we want to challenge and rival them for. They're going to eat our food, and we're not going to. So here's India. It's not just China. Here's India's almond consumption over the last few years. Look at it grow. Here's China's walnuts. China grows walnuts. It's not just like China buys things they can't grow. China grows walnuts, and that's what they're doing with walnuts right now. It's going up geometrically. And, I'm sorry, that's their production. That's Chinese production of walnuts. So China's producing a lot of food and still importing a lot of food that they produce. So it's not like that they'll just start producing their own, and once they get geared up, they'll quit buying ours. They don't have the resources to expand the lifestyle that their people are going to demand and grow all their own food. They have zero horticulture, landscape horticulture over there. That will be challenging. Here's what they're exporting. They're importing more, they're producing more, and they're not exporting any. Now here's another thing. In addition to this 20%, and this is why this thing's a very huge political opportunity for us to step into with this ecology, abundance versus scarcity debate. We need to have it. This is housing. I read an editorial in the Wall Street Journal the other day about this Up for Growth group, which I will agree with them on the housing problem in America. I'll have some disagreements with them on the housing solutions, but it's the typical story of where something's obstructed until it becomes a huge problem. Then a set of idiotic solutions come out of government with some business friends tied into it looking to make a buck. And this is an exact example that should echo a lot of idiocies we've seen in agriculture and food production. So here's the housing shortage. Percent of households that spend more than 30% of their gross income on housing. Look at that. Look at California. These are people who are already spending over 30% of their income on food. Low-income people in many parts of the country are also spending over 30% of their income on housing. And that's Stanislaus County there, right in the middle of all that. Now, here's the housing deficit in America. It's 3.3 million houses deficit in California, equal to about half of that in the entire country. And California is in the hands of California politics. We're not going to correct this quickly. This is going to get worse, much worse before it gets better. And I think that if we can tell our story right, these politicians that are causing these food crises and housing crises through scarcity politics and environmental restrictionism, they're going to have to pay for this. They're really jacking with people's lives. This is the report here. Now, I don't know, this is my own tangent, but this is what this group is proposing by right approval. If you've got land near a train station or a mass transit center, you've got an unabridged right to develop it into 5-story tall housing. It's idiotic. I live out towards the Modesto train station. We have an Amtrak station near our home, 2 miles from our home in the middle of the country, because that's where the rail line is. The bullet train's not coming to Modesto. It never will. It goes between San Francisco and LA and doesn't serve many of the different areas in California. Impact fee recalibration. They're going to charge developers more money, making housing more expensive. They're going to tell local communities they can't collect property tax for 10 years on these new houses, so they don't take local input and they don't let the local communities collect money. This is all a centralization of government. And then value capture, they're going to put extra fees on the small houses near the train station that the community has no input in to pay for more low-income housing in the neighborhood. All the while, the reason we're short on housing in California is the same reason we're short on food in California. We're not building the water infrastructure to supply housing permits for development of homes along the coast. If we built the water infrastructure out in California the way we need to, and we made housing permits easy to get, we would have adequate housing in California. So that's my pitch. I'm happy to take questions. I think I want to frame the way we're in the center of abundance in America. Modesto can produce food. We've produced the food for a long time, and we can produce a lot more food in the future. But if we don't, we're going to see a lot of people in America having their lifestyles go down instead of up. It'll be a big change. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Susan Parisio, and I'm from Slough House. The microphone isn't working, but I'll talk to you anyway, so I look for it. About 20 or 30 years ago, there was I believe, a public service announcement of some kind, and it was by Lauren Green. Was he not the guy from Dan Cartwright? I got that right, thank you.
Balagar, Star Galactica, and Alpo dog food.
There we go. And it resonated with me at the time because he was talking, probably 30 years ago, he was talking about the percentage of money that citizens in the United States spent on food. And the number that he put out was around 11%, so I found it really interesting that you brought that up. But I brought that up to say this: is there any way that we can get this kind of information on any kind of a PSA besides the shows that you guys have control over? Can we get it out further into the public?
Well, that chart, good question. Is there any way we can get this information out to a broader public? That chart was in the USDA annual report on farming in America. That's a very public document, and they're a huge part of the communications about nutrition programs. And USDA is not just food stamp, not just farming and research. It's a lot of the food stamp and the public food programs. So it's out there, but you're right. No one's talking about it, and that's why I think it's important here that we have discussions and start framing some of this and bringing in different perspectives. Because I'm hoping, of course, that we do take this to a larger audience. And tomorrow, we'll be looking at this in the framework of our prosecution for planting wheat in a wheat field up in Tehama County, which was my first interest. I'll give a spoiler. In 1981, we embargoed Russia for grain. We didn't sell them wheat because they invaded Afghanistan. We also canceled our participation in their Olympics. Today, Russia's taken over the global grain market. They grow and sell more wheat than anybody. And the wheat acreage in America is 43 million acres less than it was in 1981 when we were using wheat as a political weapon. So I think there's a lot of potential for this information too. Any other questions?
I would like to add to that Paul Brenner gets here later. He's with California Farm Bureau. Farm Bureau has been pushing these numbers out for a long time. So let's re-ask that question. He is here to see how they feel that that message is getting out and resonating.
Yeah. No, and Farm Bureau does annually, they do the food checkoff day, which is the first statistic you offered, which is, hey, before we even get to tax day, we've already paid for all our food for the year. Isn't farming economic? Isn't it cheap? Isn't it efficient? Isn't it wonderful that so many of us eat cheap? That's been the message of Farm Bureau over time. And you can see what's happened the last 10 years on these charts. We're being challenged for the food production, the abundance we have in America that's kept it cheap and kept it affordable for many Americans. The new message is low-income Americans are going to be left behind by our food production system because we will export it globally. Yes, Reed.
I want to clarify if I understood your point about China's purchasing power at 17,000. Is it your point that I take away that China is going to have more money to spend on California food, thus driving up commodity prices and making it more expensive for us?
Exactly that. Yes. And they're growing. They're growing at a rate that our low-income people are at 1% and not going anywhere. China's going up at 6 and 7%. Trent's got the hook out. I'm going to respect that. Thank you.